All right, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Crispin Cowan. Crispin is the inventor of many security technologies, such as stack canaries and AppArmor, that you almost certainly have in all of your devices today. He is also an alumnus of the University of Waterloo. He did his undergrad and master's degrees here, graduating in 1990. And late people. Graduating in 1990, and apparently his office was just over there, but it's now something totally different, as what might be expected. So we're very glad he was able to make it down to Waterloo today and give us a talk, so let's welcome Crispin.
Thank you. So, why should any of you listen to me? I don't actually know anything about privacy. I've never worked in privacy. As Ian said, I'm an alumnus. StackGuard is a security protection mechanism that I published 22 years ago, and it's now in every computer platform. Linux security modules is important to all of the Linux platforms. And then I went on and designed yet another sandbox for Windows. And lately I've been doing a lot of security consulting for a company called Leviathan Security Group. And before I get into the content matter, this series is sponsored in memoriam of several late computer scientists, one of whom is Len Sassman, who is one of my brothers in the Shmoo group. We miss you, Len. Threat modeling is what I mostly do. Normally used with respect to security defenses. You do systemic analysis of the thing, find the weakest points in the thing, find the most exposed parts of the thing, which is where the attackers are going to focus their efforts because it's most efficient, and they have families and dinners too. And where the defenders, the pen testers, should focus their effort. The product developers should focus their effort. You put the hardening on the exposed bits of the attack surface, not everywhere, because you can't afford to write perfect code everywhere, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with privacy. My view is that privacy is about trust. I love this definition from David Gerald, that trust is the condition required for betrayal. Think about that for a second. This is not how your mom thinks about the word trust. Trust is a fuzzy, warm word. But that's exactly what happens in security. Any component you trust is a component that can hurt you if something goes wrong. In security work, that mostly means either high privilege or highly exposed. Both of those are areas where you find an attack surface with a high privilege delta, that the defender has a lot of privileges that the attacker wishes to have, and so shenanigans ensues to obtain those privileges. In privacy, it means anyone we told a secret to. I'm trusting you with this. Great. Now there's a finite probability that the person that you told it to will leak it to someone you didn't want to tell it to. That's why it's trust. Why should we trust anyone? Because we have to. If you truly trust no one, then you end up in the woods living in a cave and hunting rabbits. So, who am I trusting when I want to communicate on the internet? Hardware vendors. Is that Huawei phone okay? OS vendors. Is Android okay? Is Windows okay? That depends on your values. The app vendor. So you're trusting Facebook, eh? Yeah. And your network provider, your Rogers, your home internet provider. They get to know all of your metadata, every IP address you connect to, and all of your clear text data. And they probably own your DNS too. So they are tracking everything that you browse. The common rationale there is, well, I'm not important. Why would anyone care what I browse? They care what everyone browses for marketing purposes, and they care what you browse when police incident happens and somebody was downloading child porn on your IP address because they were parked outside your house poaching your Wi-Fi, and that has happened. So it's a threat that your cable provider knows all the things you browse. You can protect against that by getting yourself a VPN. But then, instead of trusting the cable provider, now you're trusting the VPN provider. Frying pan fire, hence the title of the talk about who you're going to trust. In this case, I'm talking about Golden Frog Viper VPN. The pitch is that it's a commercial VPN provider. So for like 20 bucks a month, whatever they charge, they give you a VPN from your place to their cloud, exiting to the internet somewhere. A lot of their marketing value is that somewhere is in a country other than yours, so that, say, UK tourists can watch their BBC streaming TV shows when they're in America, or people who really like Doctor Who can watch them here. That's a lot of what they're selling. They promise to protect your privacy. Do we have to trust them? Yes, absolutely, because you're telling them everything you browse. They have the information, so we have to trust them. There's no way around that. They have your identity. They know where you live because you pay your bills. They have your network history. They see all your metadata, just like your ISP. So if we're trusting Golden Frog, what's the threat modeling for? They want to market what they call the no-log promise. Like, okay, we receive all of your private data about what you're browsing, but we promise we're not keeping it. Why would they, what are they defending against here? Hackers and warrants. If they were logging that you visited these websites in some log file somewhere, hackers who break into Golden Frog could grab that data, run away and find everyone who had browsed to salacious websites, and then extort you. There's a current hack going around where they don't bother finding out if you've visited salacious websites. They just claim that you have, because there's a good chance you have, and demand money. Otherwise, they will, like tell your family and your employer about those terrible websites you've been visiting. And for all the people who actually have been visiting them, a bunch of them cough up the money. This would be much worse, where they have actual proof. And warrants. Cops can go get a warrant from the courts, and you present it to a cloud provider. It says, yep, show us the logs of what Ian has been visiting. And they have to comply, because the courts win. But they don't have to comply if they don't have the logs. So that's why this promise is important, that nope, we received the data that you connected to that website there, but we promise we didn't write it down. We threw it away. That is an excellent defense against these threats. So they're not intentionally logging your personal activity. Oh, great. And if you don't believe that, then don't use Golden Frog. Use someone else. You still have to trust somebody, your choice on who you want to trust, but you have to trust their benign intent. But are they unintentionally logging? Their systems are built out of the usual stack of Linux stuff, open source software that everybody's familiar with, and it all has a propensity to log things, because logging stuff is best practice most of the time for performance and debugging and reliability and load balancing. And so all sorts of software habitually logs stuff, and Golden Frog can wish to not log it, but that doesn't mean it's true. So does it log is a legitimately hard question. And that's what they hired us for. We're normally a pen testing company. For money, we will go pen test your stuff, find the ways to break in, show them to you so that you can patch them up before the bad guys find them. In this case, they hired us to detect if they're accidentally logging things. Cool. Leviathan also applies threat modeling, that's me, to our more complex jobs. Simple jobs, you just point the hackers at the site and say, yeah, go hack that website. It's a website, it looks just like all the other websites, sure. Complex systems that have a lot of components going on, that's where I come in, apply threat modeling and go, yeah, that one, and that one, those are the rich targets, so go there. Saves a bunch of time and money. Also produces pretty pictures. But how do you threat model privacy? I call this the hot potato privacy model. That the best way to avoid logging sensitive data is to never have it. So we systematically analyzed the functionality of every node in their system and asked the question, did it ever have sensitive PII data? If it never knew it, it's not a threat in the privacy space. The more juicy data a component handles, the more of a privacy threat it is. That's their system. I'm going to talk about it in detail as in subsequent slides so you don't have to memorize it. But the user connects to the VPN termination. That's your VPN connection. And this is essentially paperwork of, did Ian pay his bill? Yes. OK, we'll let him connect. And what country does he want to exit in? UK for Doctor Who? Sure. OK, we'll fix that. The content proxy in the UK makes it appear as if that's where he is. And bookkeeping stuff. The user is not a threat to themselves, but they're running client software, and it logs. But that's on the user's computer, outside of Golden Frog's control, and the cops and the hackers hacking the user is not something they can control. So there, the question was, does it export the logs to the cloud? So we examined the client software and determined that no, it doesn't do that. Load balancers momentarily witness you connecting to Golden Frog and saying, oh yeah, use number 7. So they momentarily have your connection data and then they throw it away, supposedly. The VPN terminator has your full identity for the duration of your session. So that's the good stuff. Oh yes, Ian connected to illegal website between 9 and 11 p.m. on Thursday. Is that okay? So that's high risk. The DAPI is an API server. It has user identity from the callers when they're calling the various APIs that make the system work. They use a radius authentication server because you have to authenticate. We're not just letting anybody use the VPN. That obviously has a lot of identity information, your exact identity and your creds. And Radius software, by design, logs a lot of stuff because good security practices, you always, always, always log when people log in and log out. They want the exact opposite. The Lease database. This is temporary storage for your session information. You know, they want to issue a lease for some IP in the UK for the duration of Ian's usage, and then give it up. So it, again, is transiently logging this data, but then throwing it away. The customer database, clearly full of lots and lots of identity, but it turns out that it's read-only with respect to activity. Activity is just not sent there because they set out to do the no-log thing. So, of course, it isn't recording anything like that. Control panel API, again, API calls that have user identity in it, so it is high risk. And DNS, of course, they run their own DNS server, because if they didn't, then you'd be throwing your DNS request to looking up salaciouswebsite.com to Rogers DNS or Google DNS, and now you've blown your privacy. So of course they run a DNS server. Their DNS server ignores who you are. It could care less. It just resolves them. The transparent content proxy never has specific user identity, so we can ignore that. The logic monitor is uptime and performance data, but again, doesn't have any user-specific data, so not a risk. And system logs, they use Splunk. They have a bunch of logging software that's normal in IT ops, and it has a great propensity to log all sorts of things, especially user identity data in error conditions. Lots of open source software, when something hinky happens, starts spitting stuff into the log. And so we had to do a detailed scrub of the syslogs to make sure that user identity was not ending up there. So that essentially is the threat modeling exercise of privacy for this system. And this is how I represent threat modeling, is take the system diagram and mark it up with colors that illustrate which components are at risk and which are not. This works great when presenting the report to the CISO, because blah blah, bunch of hacker words about HTTPS and XS, eyes glaze over. Oh, pretty picture, I like colors. So this ends up in the front section of our penetration reports. It's useful for our hackers that they concentrate on the red and yellow ones and ignore the white ones. And it's useful for marketing to executives when you present the report, saying, well, yeah, this is what we did. Is that a question?
So I'm a little confused. So you don't want, so when you're assessing the threat risk, I'm going to the BBC to watch Doctor Who, that's PII, that you don't want to keep. Somebody, but you don't know who, is going to the BBC to watch Doctor Who. Is that violating privacy according to your model?
Yeah, the question is, if, say, Ian is going to the BBC to watch Doctor Who at 9 o'clock on Thursday, is that a threat that someone gets to know that? It really depends on who's asking. Going to the BBC, not really. The BBC doesn't care. If someone really wanted to dig into a piracy beef that BBC content was not licensed for use outside the UK, so technically you're breaking the law by watching it on a computer in California. The really dangerous privacy threat is you're in China and you wanted to go to Twitter to read about Hong Kong. That will get you thrown in jail.
Right, but the question is it that you care about a specific person going to Hong Kong, going to Twitter, or is it somebody went?
It's about a specific person. China doesn't get to do anything about some Golden Frog user went to Twitter. Too bad. But if specific person who's already known as a troublemaker goes to Twitter and the government finds out, that could be a very bad problem for that person. And so the objective is to not log that. That they used Golden Frog, well, we can't not log that because we have billing records. Where did they go? We don't know. We threw that all away, is the goal. And our job is to make sure that they've forgotten where that guy went. Okay. So this is the agenda for the pen testers. Go make sure that syslogs don't have user-specific activities in them. Make sure that the API servers and the VPN termination is not logging user connections. Yes, sir. Question?
No, just
More API stuff that the Radius server is not logging. That's a lot of work because it's a big piece of software and it really wants to log. User client software, make sure it's not exporting the content. The Lease DB is temporary. Make sure it's temporary. Like, yeah, you really threw it away. And the load balancers, again, temporary data, make sure that it is temporary and not keeping it around just because it forgot to delete it. Traditional penetration testing, you send the engineers to dig into the systems and they go hacking on the components, trying to break them with ways to gain unauthorized access, exploitable vulnerabilities, throw a fuzzer at it, weak authentication and cryptography, like what do you mean you're using MD5 and TLS 1.0? That's the normal kind of activities our pen testers do. In this case, it was the privacy search, dig into the systems to see are they logging stuff, with the added advantage that we get user accounts. So we know our identity, we go use the system, and then look for that identity in the logs. And the results of our pen test, they told us that they didn't want a security pen test, they wanted this privacy thing. You can't keep hackers away from doing security. You just can't. For free, we gave them 2 security bugs. That doesn't mean that it's really secure because they weren't looking for security bugs, but they found some. One reflected XSS that at least was in a deprecated endpoint, and one improper authentication in the API server. In privacy, we found 3 explicit instances of logging PII in the open source components, and they go fix it. 5 instances of exposing sensitive information, such as user enumeration, and 2 instances of sensitive information exposed locally on the server. One of our pen testers was most upset that proc kcore was open for read on their servers. And it's a private server. I don't care a lot that you're not going to have malware running on there. But if a hacker got in there, they could go read proc kcore, which gives you all the kernel memory. And from there, they could read current accesses. So if they had persistent malware living on the server, they could then watch the salacious sites that Ian visits in the future, as long as their malware is there. So that's a violation. We think they should fix it, but that is not high severity. The high severity stuff is up here. You look shocked.
Readable to root, presumably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most common kernel configurations are not deployed with something that prevents root from reading kernel memory, period.
And root can change its mind.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I personally thought this was kind of low sev, like, all right, technically it could be better. But someone else had a different opinion, so we reported it. We ranked it appropriately. I'm just reporting the 8 or so bugs that are in the report. And a feature of this talk is that I can point you at the tweet where it's all documented, but the report is out there. You can actually go read the 30-page thing with all the bug details you want. That is highly unusual in commercial pen testing. Companies very, very rarely publish that kind of thing because it's a guidebook to attackers for how to hack the site. But because this was not a security test, it was a privacy test, They want to market it to the sky, that this is see, we don't log, we promise, and we paid big money to make sure that we don't log your stuff. So that provides a unique opportunity to see how commercial pen testing works. My conclusions from this experience, yeah, I know. You must trust your privacy provider. They know where you live. Privacy providers have risks too. They try to not violate your privacy, but it involves a lot of software, and the software might not be doing exactly what they thought it should. That gives you threats from warrants and hackers and open source software with a propensity to tattle. Threat modeling, normally used for security, can also be used for privacy. Privacy risk corresponds to the sensitivity and quantity of sensitive data that each component handles. That's the hot potato security model. Our customer, Golden Frog, is selling trust. They're a trust vendor. And they're engendering that trust by employing third-party pen testers to assure that they are doing the best job possible at delivering on that promise. And that be it. We have a few minutes.
Can you go back, I think 2 slides, just to the list of, yeah, great. So can you say more details about the issues that were found there?
I could if I remembered them. They're in the report. I think they're about as boring as you would expect, that some logging functionality in open source software that's supposed to be there was still there, and they hadn't succeeded in disabling all of it.
And so you had mentioned that you have to log that a particular user used the system for billing purposes.
Yes.
Have to is maybe a strong word now. There are, like, first of all, if you just offer, I don't know what their service model is, but if you had like a flat rate service, like you're a customer for $20 a month or whatever.
Yep.
You never actually have to log that they used the service.
Well, that is in fact what they're doing. They used to have a per hour model and they got rid of it. It is a dollars per month flat rate service, so that no, they're not logging when you're using the service. They just have recorded that you are a paid customer.
Right. Good. And even in the other model, you can throw clever cryptographic tricks with privacy technology at it to prove that you are allowed to use it and you accumulate a certain, and nothing is ever stored in clear text.
If you wanted to charge per hour,
yeah, there are clever things you can do.
Well, your bill is different than her bill.
Yeah.
You used it 3 hours more than she did. I believe with cryptography you could obscure when that was, but you can't obscure that it was, because your bill is bigger than hers and we can infer it from the money.
Right, but you disconnected from when you were browsing.
Yeah,
right?
but they're not doing any of that.
Right.
They're aggressively trying not to do that. Did Ian use the service this month? We don't know, we forgot.
Right.
Would using live CD type systems that have no physical capability of logging things be useful here, and do they do that?
The question is, did they use live CDs so that you can't, that the disk is read-only? And the answer is no, they don't do that. And they can't, because they do have to log things transiently. Like the Lease database says that this IP in the UK belongs to you until you sign out around 2 in the morning when you've binged all the Doctor Who and you go to bed. But as soon as you disconnect, they try to throw the whole log away. But they need to hold the lease open.
But that touches disk?
Yeah, I can imagine that they could put it in memory only. But no, they just don't do that kind of read-only disk software.
Because once you touch disk, it's really hard to untouch the disk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so mine's a less technical question. I know we have some students in the room here, so I don't know if you had an opportunity to share your story briefly at the beginning, but this is a pretty cool job.
We had a schedule-in version where I had a meeting with the students prior to the talk, and I deliberately avoided spilling the beans on my whole talk during that session because I wanted to have something to say. But
yeah, just wondering, you know, in terms of the skills needed to have a job like this, like what are you looking for? Like what do students do to train to be able to do this kind of work? And is it a growing field? Is it something that you see more?
okay, so the question was about the job skills requirements and opportunities in the pen testing space. The skills at base is that you should be able to program, because you can't hack that which you cannot program, because you have to be able to mentally model the program. And then it becomes familiarity with various threat vectors and exploitation schemes, which you can learn from books and from blogs and technology, and you need to keep learning constantly because they keep moving. Is it a good opportunity field? Absolutely. We are hiring right now. Talk to me if you want a job. The industry in general has an approximately 0% unemployment rate. So the security industry cannot produce pen testers fast enough. Every pen testing firm I know is hiring. So really, if you want to be a hacker, I can help you with that. Sir?
So the results that you presented, right, that's basically a one-time visit of this VPN provider, right?
Yes?
So the day after you released your report, they could have changed their setup, and now they are logging when we don't know. So what you really should do is every once in a while you should revisit them, right? Maybe ideally even unattended.
Well, that's what this slide is about. Do you have to trust Golden Frog? Absolutely. The second we turned our back, they could have replaced the system with some other system that delivers VPN functionality and just pipelines all your data straight to the FBI. I would have no way of knowing whether they did that or not.
Is this something that came up in your discussions with them? Like why were they interested in this?
In the first 30 seconds of the conversation, yes, we addressed that yeah, okay, it's known that customers must trust Golden Frog to have good intent. This is about the diligence and correctness of their execution of that intent.
But they had no interest in having you repeat this check every once in a while?
Well, they seem really happy with us. They published the report. When I tweeted about it, they said, yeah, it was great. And if they need a retest, I expect them to come to us because they're so happy. But even with a retest, they could have, if you assume they're malicious, they could have never run this system, and they could be running something completely different, and we would never know.
A couple of questions. So, for example, there is nothing preventing, say, the Chinese government from setting up a VPN company.
That's true. There is nothing preventing authoritarian states from setting up VPN companies and then not telling anyone.
Right. Until the first time they use it, they cache out all the credit that they have accumulated up to that point, but then they have all the data up to that point. The second question is more naive. I just don't understand the working of VPN very well. But say if a certain activist have been observed to have sent a request to a VPN server, that communication I think is clear, really clear.
Yes.
And then
The
VPN server, there is a certain communication into, say, the foreign around the headquarters, the government headquarters. Do we care about this model in which different pieces can be correlated to attack the system?
So the question is about external correlation, that an authoritarian state can observe when a suspected activist connects to the VPN and when the VPN connects to Reddit, and you can correlate those times. That's absolutely true, and there's nothing the VPN provider can do about it. Much of the student discussion before the talk was about Tor, and that correlation threat also exists there. And in fact, one of the greatest threats to Tor is the authoritarian states observing the exit notes of the Tor network and finding out where traffic is going from there. And I'm sure they use correlation with suspected activists in San Francisco or whatever, correlating their connection to the Tor and the Tor's connection to suspected target sites.
Okay, so I work here at the university. I often travel for work, and when we do our VPN that we have been told to use, I'm like, what questions do I need to be asking to make sure that we're not, that they're not logging or doing anything?
Corporate VPN is a different product than a personal VPN.
Oh, okay.
This VPN is intended to obscure your personal activity as you access the internet.
Okay.
A corporate VPN lets you be in a hotel room in Poughkeepsie and connect to the private corporate network of the university. And there's a bunch of machines inside the university's LAN that are not exposed to the internet. And the only way you can get to them is with the VPN that connects you to the inside. Leviathan also uses a VPN. It lets me access the juicy servers on the inside that have the bug database.
Waterloo actually offers both kinds of VPN, so that if you're, well, CS offers both kinds of VPN. So what the university offers only the kind you just talked about, which is you can connect to Waterloo machines from wherever country you're traveling in.
Yeah.
But CS also offers the second kind of VPN, which is if you're in some country that blocks access to certain parts of the internet that you need to access, you can use the CS VPN in order to go off campus.
And it's not terribly convenient, but you can use the corporate VPN for privacy purposes. If you're in an authoritarian state, you VPN to Waterloo, and from there you access websites out around the world, then the authoritarian state can't see what you're doing. That'll work well with SSH and not so good with web browsing.
Questions?
No?
Why?
Pardon?
Why is not logging things still legal? I guess is my question.
That's a good question. It would probably be I don't know. So the question was, why is not logging things still legal? In theory, a nation state could mandate that a provider must log stuff. I'm not aware of any American constitutional rule that says you can't write such a law. Britain is busy writing laws that says that you don't get to access naughty websites, period. That wouldn't be constitutional in America, but it is in Britain and Australia. And so I see nothing that would stop them from passing such a law. And then the restriction would be, this company's official name is Viper VPN GmbH. So German law would apply, and Australian law would have to say, thou shalt not access foreign VPN companies.
So Germany actually had a very interesting history in this respect, in that Germany did have a law saying you were required to log things, but you in this case were like ISPs directly, not third-party service providers like VPNs. But then that turned out conflicted with Germany's privacy law, and the European Court of Justice sided with the privacy law. And so, at the end of the day, German companies are not in fact required to, German ISPs are not in fact required to maintain logs.
Cool.
But there was,
The good guys won for a
Germany didn't try to get to get out of
right, Germany did not try to exit the EU in order to get there. But this is in fact one of the reasons the UK puts forward for Brexit, is because they don't want to be bound by the European Court of Justice, because they keep like doing these privacy things.
because justice is so terribly inconvenient.
Cool. Any last questions? Okay, let's thank Dr. Cowan.
Thank you very much.